The rain fell in sheets across the affluent Boston suburb, drumming against the windshield of Harrison Wells's Bentley Continental as his driver navigated the slick roads. Harrison stared absently at the passing scenery, barely registering the opulent mansions and manicured lawns. At 53, the tech billionaire had acquired everything money could buy, yet felt nothing as he returned from another successful board meeting. The car slowed unexpectedly. Through the rain-streaked window, Harrison noticed a small figure huddled under a makeshift cardboard shelter beside a pet shop. A child, no more than 10 years old, sat soaking wet, holding a squirming golden retriever puppy. The boy's clothes were neat but worn, and a hand-painted sign propped against his knees read, "Puppy for sale, $500, need money for Mom's medicine." "Why are we stopping, Edward?" Harrison asked, his voice carrying the crisp authority that had intimidated countless business rivals. "Traffic light, sir," his driver replied. "Should only be a moment." Harrison found himself unable to look away from the boy, who was gently whispering to the puppy, clearly trying to comfort the animal despite his own obvious distress. Something in the scene pierced through Harrison's carefully constructed emotional barriers, a memory from his own childhood perhaps, when his mother had fallen ill and his father had worked 3 jobs to pay the mounting medical bills. The light changed, but Harrison made an impulsive decision. "Pull over, Edward." "Sir? Just for a moment. Right there beside that pet shop." Edward complied, and Harrison stepped out into the downpour without waiting for his driver to retrieve an umbrella. His Italian leather shoes splashed in puddles as he approached the boy, who looked up with startled blue eyes. "Hello there," Harrison said, making an effort to soften his normally intimidating demeanor. "That's a beautiful puppy you have." The boy clutched the golden ball of fur closer to his chest. "His name is Buddy. He's the best dog ever. But," his voice cracked, "my mom needs surgery and we don't have insurance. I'm selling him to help pay for it. My name is Theo Teller, and if this introduction has already piqued your curiosity, leave your like to follow the unfolding of this heartbreaking journey. Which city are you watching this from? Let us know in the comments below." Harrison glanced at the pet shop behind them, its warm lights illuminating tanks of tropical fish and cages of colorful birds. A suspicion formed in his mind. "Did you get this puppy from this shop?" The boy shook his head vigorously, sending droplets of water flying from his soaked brown hair. "No, sir. Buddy was born from our neighbor's dog. I've raised him since he was born 6 weeks ago. He sleeps in my bed every night." His lower lip trembled. "He's the only one who listens when I'm scared about Mom." Harrison felt something shift inside him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in decades. Without fully understanding why, he knelt down, ignoring the rain soaking through his $5,000 suit. In that moment, something about the boy's desperate love for both his mother and this puppy resonated with a part of Harrison he thought had died long ago, when he'd abandoned his humble origins to build his empire. "What's your name, son?" Harrison asked, rain streaming down his face. "Oliver," the boy replied. "Oliver Mackenzie." "And where is your mother now, Oliver?" "At home. My aunt is with her while I'm here." He swallowed hard. "Mom doesn't know I'm selling Buddy. She'd be mad. But the doctor said she needs the operation soon, and I heard her crying about the money last night." As Oliver spoke those words, Harrison noticed a black Mercedes pull up nearby. A woman in an expensive fur coat hurried toward them, eyeing the puppy with interest. Something cold and possessive flashed through Harrison's heart, a fierce determination that surprised him with its intensity. The woman approached, opening her designer purse as she walked. "Is this the puppy from the ad online?" she asked, barely acknowledging Oliver as she addressed the question to Harrison, assuming he was the seller. "There's been a misunderstanding," Harrison heard himself say. "The puppy isn't for sale anymore." The woman's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose in displeasure. "But I drove all the way from Cambridge. The ad said $500. I apologize for your inconvenience," Harrison replied with the same tone he used to dismiss over-eager investors. "Perhaps the pet shop can help you find another puppy." After a moment of frosty silence, the woman turned on her heel and stalked away. Oliver looked up at Harrison with confusion. "But sir, I need to sell Buddy. My mom—" "I understand," Harrison interrupted gently, "but I think there might be a better solution. Can you tell me more about your mother's condition?" As the rain continued to fall, Oliver explained that his mother, Sarah Mackenzie, was a single parent who worked as an elementary school teacher. 6 months ago, she had been diagnosed with a heart condition that required surgery. Without insurance to cover the procedure, they had been struggling to gather the funds. The medical bills had already depleted their modest savings. "She tries to hide how bad it is," Oliver said, his young voice heavy with a maturity that came from witnessing a parent's suffering. "But I hear her breathing hard after just walking up the stairs. Last week she couldn't finish teaching her class because she got so dizzy." Harrison felt something stir within him, a long, dormant sense of purpose. For 20 years, he had channeled all his energy into building Wells Technologies, amassing a fortune that had ultimately left him isolated in a penthouse apartment with no one to share it with. His ex-wife had left him a decade ago, citing his emotional unavailability. He had no children, no close friends, only business associates who feared rather than respected him. "Where do you live, Oliver?" Harrison asked. Oliver pointed vaguely eastward. "Oakwood Apartments. It's about a mile that way." Harrison recognized the name, a modest but respectable apartment complex that housed many middle-class families. "Would you allow me to drive you home? I'd like to speak with your mother." Oliver hesitated, clutching Buddy closer. "Mom says I shouldn't go with strangers." "Your mother is absolutely right," Harrison said with approval. "How about this? You can call her from my car phone, and my driver will stay with us the entire time. You can even hold the door open while you talk to her." After a moment's consideration, Oliver nodded. Harrison signaled to Edward, who promptly brought the car around. As they settled into the leather back seat, Oliver's eyes widened at the luxurious interior. But his attention quickly returned to the puppy, who was shivering slightly from the rain. Harrison removed his cashmere suit jacket and offered it as a makeshift towel. "May I?" he asked before gently wrapping it around the puppy. The absurdity of using a $3,000 jacket to dry a mutt didn't escape him, but somehow it felt like the most natural gesture in the world. Oliver used the car phone to call home, explaining the situation to his aunt in a hushed voice. After receiving permission, he gave Edward the address. As they drove through the winding suburban streets, Harrison found himself studying the boy. There was something about Oliver's selflessness that stirred long-buried memories of Harrison's own childhood, before ambition and bitterness had hardened his heart. "You really love your mother, don't you?" Harrison asked softly. Oliver nodded, his eyes suddenly swimming with tears. "She's the best mom ever. She reads to me every night, even when she's tired, and she never complains, even though I know she feels bad a lot." The boy's voice dropped to a whisper. "Sometimes I pretend to go to bed early so she can rest, but I hear her crying in her room." The simple statement hit Harrison with unexpected force. When was the last time anyone had loved him with such pure devotion? When was the last time he had loved anyone that way? They pulled up to Oakwood Apartments, a modest three-story building with well-maintained but simple grounds. As they approached apartment 2B, Harrison found himself unexpectedly nervous. What was he doing here? What did he hope to accomplish? Before he could reconsider, Oliver knocked on the door, still cradling Buddy against his chest. The door opened to reveal a slender woman in her mid-30s with the same striking blue eyes as Oliver. Despite her obvious exhaustion, Sarah Mackenzie possessed a quiet dignity that immediately commanded Harrison's respect. Behind her stood an older woman, presumably the aunt, who eyed Harrison with undisguised suspicion. "Oliver, who is this?" Sarah asked, her voice gentle but tinged with concern as she looked from her son to the imposing figure of Harrison Wells. Before Oliver could answer, the aunt gasped. "Sarah, do you know who this is? That's Harrison Wells, the Harrison Wells of Wells Technologies." Sarah's eyes widened slightly, but she remained composed. I'm sorry, Mr. Wells, but I don't understand why you brought my son home. Oliver, what were you doing out in this weather, and why do you have Buddy with you? Oliver looked down at his feet, guilt written across his face. I was trying to sell Buddy to help pay for your surgery, Mom. Sarah's expression crumpled. She knelt despite her obvious discomfort and pulled her son into a tight embrace. Oh, Oliver, you can't do that. Buddy is your dog, your best friend. But you need the operation, and I heard you telling Aunt Claire that we don't have enough money. Oliver's voice was muffled against his mother's shoulder. Harrison cleared his throat, suddenly feeling like an intruder on this intimate family moment. Mrs. Mackenzie, may I come in? I believe I might be able to help. Sarah looked up, wiping away a tear. The wariness in her eyes was evident, but she nodded and stepped aside. The apartment was small but immaculately kept, with bookshelves overflowing with children's literature and framed student artwork on the walls. Family photos showed Oliver growing from an infant to the determined young boy he was now, always with Sarah's loving smile beside him. Please, sit down, Sarah offered, gesturing to their modest living room furniture. She moved carefully, and Harrison noticed how she steadied herself against the wall, a subtle indication of her weakened condition. I apologize for the intrusion, Harrison began, perching uncomfortably on the edge of a well-worn sofa. I encountered your son trying to sell his puppy in the rain, and I was moved by his dedication to you. Sarah looked at Oliver with a mix of exasperation and overwhelming love. He has always been too concerned about taking care of me, when it should be the other way around. She turned back to Harrison. Mr. Wells, thank you for bringing him home safely, but I'm not sure what kind of help you're offering. Harrison straightened, falling back on the formal tone he used in business negotiations. I understand you require cardiac surgery that your insurance won't cover. I'd like to pay for it. A heavy silence fell over the room. The aunt gasped again, while Sarah's face registered shock, then immediate suspicion. Why would you do that? She asked directly. You don't know us. It was a fair question, one that Harrison himself had been wrestling with since the moment he'd stopped his car. Why was he here, offering to help strangers? Was it guilt over his years of single-minded pursuit of wealth? Was it Oliver's resemblance to the boy Harrison had once been before life had hardened him? Your son's willingness to sacrifice something he loves to save you. It reminded me of something I'd forgotten, Harrison admitted, surprising himself with his candor. When I was about Oliver's age, my mother fell ill. My father worked himself to exhaustion to pay for her care. I promised myself then that if I ever had the means, I would make sure no child had to watch a parent suffer because of money. The lie came easily, a philanthropic motivation that sounded more noble than the truth. That seeing Oliver had cracked something in Harrison's carefully constructed emotional armor, revealing a loneliness so profound it physically hurt. Sarah studied him carefully. That's very generous, Mr. Wells, but we can't accept such charity. We'll find another way. Harrison recognized the pride in her voice, the same pride he'd carried throughout his own difficult childhood. It wouldn't be charity, Mrs. Mackenzie. I've been looking to establish a foundation to help educators with medical needs. You would simply be the first recipient. Another falsehood, but one he could easily make true with a single phone call to his lawyers. Sarah still looked unconvinced, and Harrison realized he needed to offer her dignity as well as financial assistance. Think of it as an investment in the future, he continued. The children you teach deserve to have you at full health. Oliver, who had been quietly listening while stroking Buddy's fur, spoke up. Please let him help, Mom. I don't want you to be sick anymore. Sarah looked at her son, then back at Harrison. Something in her expression shifted, not full acceptance, but a willingness to consider his offer. I appreciate what you're proposing, Mr. Wells, but I would need to understand exactly what this arrangement would entail. Harrison leaned forward, his business acumen taking over. The arrangement would be simple. My foundation, which I'll establish tomorrow morning, will cover all medical expenses related to your surgery and recovery. There will be no expectation of repayment, no public announcements using your name, and no strings attached. He paused, then added, "All I ask is that you allow me to check in occasionally to see how you're progressing." Sarah exchanged a look with her sister, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Mr. Wells," Sarah began, her voice steady despite her obvious emotion, "your offer is extraordinarily generous. I would be lying if I said we don't need the help." She took a deep breath. "But I need to understand why. Why us? Why now? People like you don't usually notice people like us." The directness of her question caught Harrison off guard. In his world of corporate maneuvering, people rarely questioned his motives to his face. They speculated behind his back, certainly, but never challenged him directly with such unvarnished honesty. "Sometimes life presents us with unexpected turning points," Harrison said slowly, searching for words that would make sense of his own impulsive decision. "Seeing your son today, willing to give up something he loves dearly to help you, it made me realize how far I've strayed from what truly matters." Oliver, who had been listening intently while sitting cross-legged on the floor with Buddy, looked up. "Does that mean I can keep Buddy?" A genuine smile broke across Harrison's face, perhaps his first in months. "Yes, Oliver, Buddy stays with you." The boy's face lit up with relief and joy, and he buried his face in the puppy's golden fur. The simple happiness of the moment struck Harrison forcefully. When was the last time he had felt such uncomplicated joy? When had his own success last brought him anything resembling the pure delight on Oliver's face? Stories like this remind us of life's unexpected turning points and the power of compassion. If you believe in second chances and the impact of kindness, consider subscribing to not miss future journeys of transformation. "I should go," Harrison said abruptly, rising to his feet. The emotional intensity of the room suddenly felt overwhelming. "My assistant will contact you tomorrow to arrange everything. Here's my card with my direct line." He handed Sarah his personal business card, something he rarely gave to anyone. Sarah accepted it with a graceful nod. "Thank you, Mr. Wells. I don't fully understand why you're doing this, but I am grateful." As Harrison turned to leave, Oliver jumped up. "Wait, will you come back to visit us? And Buddy?" The question caught Harrison entirely unprepared. Visit? What place did he have in the lives of these people once the financial arrangements were made? Yet looking at Oliver's earnest face, he couldn't bring himself to refuse. "If your mother permits it," he replied carefully. Sarah studied him with those perceptive blue eyes. "You're welcome to visit, Mr. Wells." Outside, as Edward opened the car door, Harrison took one last look at the modest apartment building. Something significant had shifted inside him today, something he couldn't yet name, but could feel reshaping his perspective with every breath. Back in his penthouse that evening, Harrison stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston's glittering skyline. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and sparkling. He held a glass of 30-year-old scotch, a ritual nightcap he usually savored, but tonight it tasted like nothing. His phone rang. It was Richard Daniels, his CFO, calling about a potential acquisition they'd been discussing for months. "Harrison, the Meridian board is wavering. If we increase our offer by just 5%, we can close this by the end of the week." Just yesterday, acquiring Meridian Tech had seemed like the most important goal in Harrison's world. Now, the prospect stirred nothing in him. "Abandon the acquisition," Harrison said. "What? But we've been working on this for—" "I said abandon it. We're going to redirect those funds. I'll need you to set up a medical foundation by tomorrow, something focused on helping teachers with catastrophic medical expenses." Silence filled the line as Richard processed this radical departure from character. "Harrison, are you feeling all right?" "Better than I have in years," Harrison replied, surprising himself with the truth of the statement. "I'll explain everything tomorrow. For now, just start the paperwork." After hanging up, Harrison found himself staring at a framed photograph he normally ignored, the only personal item in his sterile living space. It showed a younger version of himself, standing beside his parents in front of their modest family home. His mother's face, thin but smiling after her recovery, and his father's weathered hands resting proudly on Harrison's shoulders. When had he last truly looked at it? When had he last remembered where he came from? Harrison picked up the photo, wiping away a thin layer of dust. Something about Oliver's love for his mother had awakened memories Harrison had buried decades ago, of a time when human connections, not corporate acquisitions, had defined his sense of worth. The following morning, Harrison arrived at his office uncharacteristically early. His executive assistant Meredith did a double-take when she saw him striding through the doors at 7 a.m., especially noting his unusually relaxed demeanor. "Good morning, Meredith. I need you to clear my schedule today. We're establishing a new foundation, and I want it operational by this afternoon." Meredith, accustomed to Harrison's demanding requests, merely raised an eyebrow. "Certainly, sir. Any particular name for this foundation?" Harrison paused, considering. "The Second Chance Foundation." By midday, Harrison's team of attorneys and financial advisors had assembled in the conference room, puzzled by the urgency, but efficient as always. Harrison outlined his vision: a charitable organization dedicated to providing medical assistance to educators without adequate insurance coverage. "We'll start with an initial endowment of $50 million, Harrison stated, ignoring the shocked expressions around the table. "And our first beneficiary has already been identified. A local elementary school teacher named Sarah Mackenzie needs cardiac surgery immediately." Richard Daniels, still bewildered by Harrison's sudden change in priorities, cleared his throat. "Harrison, while I fully support philanthropic endeavors, this seems uncharacteristically impulsive. Perhaps we should conduct a proper needs assessment before—" "The assessment has been done," Harrison interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "Mrs. Mackenzie's situation is critical, and we're in a position to help. That's all that matters." As the meeting concluded and his team dispersed to execute his instructions, Harrison found himself staring out the window at the city below. For 20 years, he had viewed Boston as a chessboard. Buildings representing strategic assets, streets mapping potential business routes. Now, for the first time, he wondered about the people moving through those streets. How many were facing battles like Sarah's? How many children like Oliver were carrying burdens far too heavy for their young shoulders? His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Wells, there's a Dr. Eleanor Chen on line 1. She says she's calling about Sarah Mackenzie." Harrison picked up immediately. "Dr. Chen, thank you for returning my call." "Mr. Wells," the cardiologist replied, her tone professional but cautious. "I understand you're offering to cover Mrs. Mackenzie's medical expenses." "That's correct. Is there a problem?" "Not exactly." Dr. Chen paused. "Mrs. Mackenzie's condition is more serious than she may have indicated. The procedure she needs is high risk, and the recovery will be lengthy. Even with the best care, there are no guarantees." Harrison felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "What are her chances without the surgery?" 6 months, perhaps less," Dr. Chen replied softly. "Her heart is failing progressively." The stark reality of the situation hit Harrison with unexpected force. 6 months. Oliver could lose his mother in 6 months. The thought of that bright, brave boy facing such a devastating loss made Harrison's chest tighten. "What hospital can provide the best care for her condition?" he asked, already mentally rearranging priorities. "Massachusetts General has an excellent cardiac team, but there's a specialist at the Cleveland Clinic who pioneered a newer, less invasive procedure that might be more appropriate for Mrs. Mackenzie's specific condition." Make the arrangements for whichever option gives her the best chance, Harrison instructed. Cost is not a consideration. And Dr. Chen, I'd prefer if Mrs. Mackenzie isn't burdened with these details until absolutely necessary. No. After ending the call, Harrison sat motionless at his desk, confronting emotions he'd spent years avoiding. What had begun as an impulsive good deed was evolving into something far more complex. He was becoming involved in this family's life in ways he hadn't anticipated, ways that threatened the emotional distance he'd maintained from everyone for decades. That evening, against his better judgment, Harrison found himself driving to Oakwood Apartments alone. He'd dismissed Edward for the night, preferring to make this visit without the formal trappings of his usual life. As he parked his rarely used personal car, a modest sedan he kept for the occasional weekend, Harrison questioned his own motives. Was he genuinely concerned about Sarah's well-being, or was there something more selfish at play? Was he using this family's struggle to fill some void in his own empty existence? Before he could answer these uncomfortable questions, he spotted Oliver in the small community garden behind the apartment building. The boy was sitting on a bench, Buddy romping in the grass nearby. Harrison approached slowly, not wanting to startle them. Oliver looked up, and his face brightened. "Mr. Wells, you came back." "I said I would," Harrison replied, surprised by how much the boy's delight affected him. "Mom's resting, but she's feeling better today," Oliver reported, patting the bench beside him in invitation. "She even helped me with my science project for a little while." Harrison sat down, oddly touched by the simple gesture of inclusion. "What's your science project about?" "The solar system," Oliver exclaimed, his enthusiasm infectious. "I'm building a model with all the planets. Did you know Jupiter has 79 moons?" "I didn't know that," Harrison admitted, genuinely interested. When was the last time he'd learned something that wasn't related to market trends or competitive advantages? "Mom helps me research facts for all my projects," Oliver continued. "She says learning should be an adventure." Harrison nodded, suddenly understanding why Sarah had chosen teaching as her profession. "Your mother sounds like an exceptional teacher." "She's the best," Oliver agreed fervently. "All the kids love her class. She makes everything into a game or a story, so it's never boring." His expression grew somber. "But she had to take a leave of absence because she gets too tired now." Harrison felt a fresh wave of determination. Sarah Mackenzie clearly made a difference in many young lives beyond her son's. Her worth couldn't be measured in financial terms, yet in Harrison's world, that was how value was typically assessed. The irony wasn't lost on him. A woman who created immeasurable social good struggled for basic medical care, while he, who had spent decades accumulating wealth primarily for its own sake, had more than he could ever use. As Buddy bounded over to them, a yellow tennis ball in his mouth, Oliver laughed and threw it across the small lawn. "Mom says we might be able to afford her surgery soon. Did you really help us, Mr. Wells?" "Yes," Harrison replied simply. "The arrangements are being made. Your mother should be hearing from the doctors very soon." Oliver's eyes welled with tears, and before Harrison could react, the boy threw his arms around him in a tight hug. "Thank you for saving my mom, and for letting me keep Buddy." The embrace lasted only seconds, but it shattered something fundamental in Harrison's carefully constructed emotional defenses. When was the last time anyone had hugged him with such unguarded gratitude? When had he last allowed himself to be vulnerable enough to receive such a gesture? As Oliver pulled away to chase after Buddy again, Harrison remained frozen on the bench, overwhelmed by the realization that in trying to save Sarah Mackenzie, he might inadvertently be saving himself as well. The following week brought rapid developments. Sarah was scheduled for a consultation at the Cleveland Clinic with Dr. James Montgomery, the pioneering cardiac surgeon Dr. Chen had recommended. Harrison had arranged for a private medical transport, insisting that Sarah shouldn't endure the strain of commercial travel in her condition. What Harrison hadn't anticipated was Sarah's firm insistence on meeting with him before departing. "Mr. Wells, I appreciate all you've done," she said, as they sat in the small cafe near her apartment. She'd chosen the location, neutral ground, Harrison realized, and she'd come alone. "But I need to understand exactly what's happening. Dr. Chen mentioned specialists, private transportation, experimental procedures. This goes far beyond what we discussed initially." Harrison studied her across the table. Despite her pallor and the visible fatigue in her movements, Sarah Mackenzie carried herself with quiet dignity. She met his gaze directly, unintimidated by his wealth or reputation. "You need the best care available," Harrison replied simply. "The Cleveland Clinic has it." And why should Harrison Wells, who acquires companies like others, buy groceries, care so much about an elementary school teacher he met by chance? Sarah pressed, her blue eyes, so like Oliver's, searching his face. "I've done my research on you, Mr. Wells. Philanthropy hasn't exactly been your priority until now." The directness of her question caught him off guard. In the corporate world, people approached him with careful deference, their true questions wrapped in layers of politeness. Sarah's straightforward inquiry was refreshing and unsettling. "Perhaps it should have been," he admitted. "I've spent 2 decades accumulating wealth without much thought to what it was for, beyond proving I could do it." He paused, struggling to articulate feelings he'd only recently begun to acknowledge himself. "Meeting Oliver, seeing his willingness to sacrifice for you, it made me remember things I'd forgotten." "What things?" Sarah asked softly, her expression softening. Harrison hesitated. He rarely spoke about his past, even to those closest to him. Not that anyone particularly close remained in his life. "My mother was very ill when I was about Oliver's age. My father worked himself to exhaustion to pay for her care." He traced the rim of his coffee cup, lost in recollection. "I promised myself that if I ever had the means, I would make sure no child had to watch a parent suffer because of money." It was the same explanation he'd offered in their apartment, but this time it wasn't entirely a fabrication. The memory was real, though it hadn't been his motivation for stopping that rainy day. The true reason remained more elusive, more complex. Something about Oliver's innocence and Sarah's quiet strength that pierced through decades of emotional armor. Sarah studied him for a long moment. "I believe you," she said finally. "But Mr. Wells, I need to be clear about something. I'm grateful for your help, more grateful than I can express. But I won't become a project for you to feel better about yourself, and neither will my son." Harrison blinked, surprised by her perceptiveness and her candor. "That's fair," he acknowledged, "though I think Oliver might have his own opinions about our friendship." A small smile touched Sarah's lips. "Yes, he's quite taken with you. He's told everyone at school that Buddy was saved by a real-life Tony Stark." Harrison laughed, a genuine sound that surprised even himself. "I'm not sure that's entirely flattering." "It is from Oliver," Sarah assured him. Her expression grew serious again. "Mr. Wells." "Harrison, please." "Harrison," she amended. "I'm going to this consultation because my son needs his mother. But I want you to understand that when I recover, I intend to repay your foundation. It may take years, but I will." He started to protest, but something in her expression stopped him. This wasn't about money. It was about dignity. "I understand," he said instead. "The foundation will accept your contributions when you're ready." They lapsed into silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Harrison found himself studying Sarah's face, noting the intelligence in her eyes, the strength evident despite her physical frailty. What kind of person maintained such fierce independence in the face of overwhelming odds? What kind of mother inspired the devotion Oliver showed? "May I ask you something personal?" Harrison ventured. Sarah nodded cautiously. "Oliver's father. Is he still in the picture?" A shadow crossed her face. "No. He left when Oliver was 2. Decided family life wasn't for him after all." She squared her shoulders. "It's been just the 2 of us since then." Harrison nodded, feeling a surge of anger toward this unknown man who had abandoned his responsibilities, and a grudging respect for Sarah, who had shouldered them alone. "Oliver mentioned you read to him every night," Harrison said, changing the subject. Sarah's expression warmed. "Yes, it's our tradition. We're currently working our way through the Chronicles of Narnia. Even though he's old enough to read them himself, he still likes when I do the different voices." "I never had children," Harrison found himself saying. "My ex-wife wanted them, but I was always too focused on the next acquisition, the next market to conquer." The admission surprised him. It wasn't something he typically discussed, certainly not with someone he barely knew. "I told myself there would be time later." "There might still be," Sarah offered gently. Harrison gave a non-committal nod, unwilling to delve deeper into his regrets with someone facing such immediate challenges. "Tell me about your teaching," he said instead. "Oliver says all the kids love your class." For the next hour, they talked about Sarah's innovative teaching methods, her belief in experiential learning, and her dreams for her students. Harrison found himself genuinely fascinated. In his world, education was often discussed in terms of metrics and outcomes, policy and politics. Sarah spoke of it as a calling, a deeply human enterprise requiring creativity, patience, and unwavering belief in each child's potential. As their conversation wound down, Sarah checked her watch. "I should get back. Oliver will be home from school soon, and we still have some packing to do for the trip." "Of course," Harrison signaled for the check. "Sarah, while you're in Cleveland, would it be all right if I checked in on Oliver occasionally? I understand your sister is staying with him, but perhaps I could take him and Buddy to the park or something." Sarah looked surprised, then thoughtful. "He would like that, and it would give Claire a break." She hesitated. "But Harrison, I need to ask you something important." "Anything. Don't disappear from his life when this is over." Her voice was steady, but her eyes held a mother's fierce protectiveness. "Oliver has already had one important man walk away. I won't have him experience that again." The request stunned Harrison with its implication that Sarah expected him to remain in their lives beyond this medical crisis, that she was entrusting him with a small piece of her son's emotional well-being. It was a responsibility he hadn't sought, yet found himself unwilling to refuse. "I won't disappear," he promised, surprised by how firmly he meant it. As they parted outside the cafe, Sarah offered her hand. Harrison took it, noting the strength in her grip despite her fragile appearance. This woman facing a life-threatening condition showed more courage than many of the powerful executives he dealt with daily. "Thank you," she said simply. "Safe travels," he replied. "And Sarah, you're going to beat this." She smiled, a genuine warm expression that transformed her tired face. "I intend to. I have a very good reason to fight." Watching her walk away, Harrison realized he was stepping into uncharted territory. For decades, he had kept people at a distance, viewing personal connections as potential vulnerabilities. Now, almost despite himself, he was forming bonds that couldn't be managed with contracts or financial transactions. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: purpose. 3 days after Sarah departed for Cleveland, Harrison found himself sitting on a park bench watching Oliver throw a tennis ball for an ecstatic Buddy. The golden retriever puppy bounded across the grass, his enthusiasm for the simple game seemingly inexhaustible. Oliver's Aunt Claire had initially been skeptical about Harrison's offer to take the boy for an afternoon, but Oliver's excitement had eventually worn down her resistance. "He's getting better at catching it," Oliver announced proudly, as Buddy successfully snatched the ball mid-air. "Good training," Harrison replied, surprising himself with how comfortable he felt in this mundane scene. So far removed from boardrooms and billion-dollar negotiations, Oliver flopped down on the bench beside him, slightly out of breath from running with the puppy. "Have you talked to Mum today? Aunt Claire said the doctors are doing lots of tests." "I spoke with Dr. Montgomery this morning," Harrison confirmed, carefully considering how much to share. Sarah had asked him to keep Oliver's spirits up without sugarcoating the situation. "They're finishing the last evaluations today, and they'll schedule the surgery soon." "Is she scared?" Oliver asked, his voice smaller. Harrison hesitated, then opted for honesty. "A little. But she's very brave, and she's focused on getting well so she can come home to you." Oliver nodded solemnly. "I'm scared too," he admitted, "but I don't tell Aunt Claire because it makes her cry." Something tightened in Harrison's chest, a physical response to the boy's vulnerability. He'd spent decades insulating himself from precisely this kind of emotional exposure, yet now found himself willingly stepping into it. "It's okay to be scared," Harrison said quietly. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you keep going even when you are afraid." "Is that what you do in business and stuff?" Harrison considered the question thoughtfully. "Sometimes. But I think I forgot how to be afraid somewhere along the way. And that's not always a good thing." "Why not?" Oliver asked, genuinely curious. "Because when you stop being afraid of anything, you might stop caring about everything," Harrison replied, the realization crystallizing as he spoke it. His ruthlessness in business, his emotional isolation, they hadn't come from strength but from a profound disconnection. Their conversation was interrupted by Harrison's phone. Seeing it was Dr. Montgomery, he stepped away to take the call, motioning for Oliver to continue playing with Buddy. "Mr. Wells," the surgeon's voice was grave, "we've completed Mrs. Mackenzie's assessments. I'm afraid the situation is more complex than we initially thought." Harrison felt his body tense. "How so?" "Her heart damage is extensive. The valve replacement alone won't be sufficient. She'll need a more comprehensive procedure, one with a significantly longer recovery period and—" he paused. "Higher risks." "What are her chances?" Harrison asked bluntly, turning his back to shield Oliver from overhearing. "Without surgery? Weeks, not months. With it, perhaps 60% chance of full recovery." Harrison closed his eyes briefly. "And she knows this?" "Yes. We discussed the options this morning. She's remarkably composed. She's authorized me to share the details with you as her financial sponsor." "When would you perform the surgery?" "Ideally, tomorrow morning. Her condition is deteriorating faster than expected. We don't want to wait." "Do it," Harrison said firmly. "Whatever she needs." After ending the call, Harrison stood motionless for a moment, struggling to process the implications. Sarah's condition was critical, far more serious than she had let on to Oliver, or even perhaps to herself. The thought of that brave, intelligent woman facing such devastating odds alone in a Cleveland hospital room hit him with unexpected force. And Oliver, what would happen to him if the worst occurred? The boy who had been willing to sell his beloved puppy to save his mother might lose her despite everything. Harrison turned back to the bench, forcing a smile for Oliver's sake. "Having fun?" Oliver nodded enthusiastically. "Buddy learned a new trick. Watch." He held up a hand. "Buddy, high five." The puppy raised his paw and touched Oliver's palm, eliciting a delighted laugh from the boy. Harrison clapped appreciatively, his mind still reeling from the doctor's news. As they walked back toward the apartment later, Oliver, chattering happily about school and his friends. Harrison made a decision. "Oliver," he said as they approached the building, "would you like to come stay at my house while your mom is away? You and Buddy both." Oliver's eyes widened. "Really? Like a sleepover?" "Something like that," Harrison replied. "I have plenty of room, and there's a small garden where Buddy could play." "But what about Aunt Claire?" "She could come too if she wants," Harrison offered, though he suspected the woman would prefer her own space. "Or she could have a break and visit you." "Can I call Mom and ask her?" Oliver asked, bouncing slightly with excitement. "Of course. In fact, I need to speak with her as well." Later that evening, after arrangements had been made, and Oliver's aunt had reluctantly agreed, following a long, private conversation with Sarah, Harrison found himself alone in his home office. The penthouse seemed different somehow. The impersonal luxury of its design suddenly apparent in a way it hadn't been before. What would Oliver think of this sterile showpiece home? Where would Buddy play without destroying some irreplaceable artifact? Harrison's phone rang, displaying the Cleveland Clinic's number. "Harrison." Sarah's voice sounded tired but steady. "Thank you for speaking with Oliver today. He's thrilled about staying with you." "Are you sure you're comfortable with this arrangement?" Harrison asked. "I understand it's unorthodox." "Nothing about this situation is orthodox," Sarah replied with a soft laugh. "But yes, I'm comfortable with it. Oliver trusts you, and I've come to trust you too." Harrison sat down heavily in his leather chair. "Sarah, Dr. Montgomery told me about tomorrow." A moment of silence passed before she responded. "Yes, it's not what we hoped for." "Why didn't you tell me how serious it was?" he asked, unable to keep a note of accusation from his voice. "Because I've spent 7 years being strong for Oliver," she replied simply. "It becomes a habit." Harrison closed his eyes, overwhelmed by admiration for her courage and frustration at her stubbornness. "I'm flying to Cleveland tonight. I'll be there before your surgery." "That's not necessary." "It is," he interrupted firmly. "You shouldn't be alone for this." Another pause, longer this time. "Thank you," she finally whispered. As Harrison ended the call, he sat motionless, confronting the magnitude of what was happening. In the span of mere weeks, his carefully ordered existence had been completely upended. He had created a medical foundation, taken personal interest in a patient's care, and was now preparing to welcome a 10-year-old boy and a puppy into his pristine home. All for a woman he barely knew, yet somehow couldn't bear to abandon. Was this what it meant to have a genuine human connection again? This terrifying vulnerability, this pressing weight of concern for another's welfare? Harrison stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the Boston skyline. For 20 years he had built walls, emotional, financial, professional, ensuring that nothing and no one could touch the fortress of his success. Now those walls were crumbling, and instead of feeling exposed, he felt alive. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Wells, your helicopter is ready on the rooftop pad, and Mr. Daniels is online too, insisting it's urgent." "Tell Richard I'll call him from Cleveland," Harrison replied, already walking toward the door. "And please have my housekeeper prepare the guest rooms. We'll be having visitors tomorrow." 4 hours later, Harrison stood outside the cardiac intensive care unit at Cleveland Clinic. Through the glass, he could see Sarah connected to various monitors, her face pale against the white hospital linens. She appeared to be sleeping, the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest oddly reassuring despite the circumstances. A nurse approached him. "Are you family, sir?" "No," Harrison replied, then corrected himself. "Not technically, but I'm all she has here." The nurse studied him for a moment, then nodded. "She's stable for now. The surgery is scheduled for 7 a.m. She glanced at her watch. "Our visiting hours are over, but Dr. Montgomery left instructions that you should be allowed in if you arrive tonight." Harrison thanked her, and entered the room quietly, taking a seat in the chair beside Sarah's bed. He hadn't sat at a hospital bedside since his mother's illness 35 years ago. The memories came flooding back, the antiseptic smell, the soft beeping of machines, the underlying current of tension. Sarah's eyes fluttered open. "Harrison," she murmured, her voice thick with medication. "You actually came." "Oh, I said I would," he replied, echoing his words to Oliver from days earlier. She smiled faintly. "Oh, Oliver's excited about staying with you. He said you have an elevator inside your house." "The penthouse has private elevator access," Harrison acknowledged, "though I suspect Buddy might prefer stairs." "He'll destroy something expensive," Sarah warned, her eyes closing again. "Oh, let him," Harrison said softly. "It's just stuffs." Coming from a man whose life had been defined by the acquisition of stuffs, the words represented a seismic shift in perspective. As he watched Sarah drift back to sleep, Harrison confronted a truth he'd been avoiding for weeks. His interest in this family had become deeply personal, transcending any notion of charity or even friendship. Tomorrow, Sarah Mackenzie would undergo high-risk surgery that might end her life. The possibility sent a wave of cold fear through Harrison, a feeling so unfamiliar he almost didn't recognize it. When had he last cared this profoundly about another person's survival? In the quiet of the hospital room, with only the steady beep of monitors as witness, Harrison Wells, billionaire corporate titan solitary figure, reached out and gently took Sarah's hand in his. The operating room was a flurry of controlled activity as Dr. Montgomery and his surgical team prepared for Sarah's procedure. Outside in the waiting area, Harrison sat alone, his usual commanding presence diminished by the sterile hospital environment and the weight of uncertainty. He'd spent the night in Sarah's room, dozing intermittently in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, unwilling to leave her alone. In the early morning hours, when the hospital was at its quietest, they'd talked in hushed voices about Oliver, about her teaching, about books they'd both read. They carefully avoided discussion of the surgery ahead, as if by unspoken agreement. When the surgical team had come to take her, she'd squeezed his hand and whispered, "If something happens, tell Oliver I was brave." Now, as the hours stretched endlessly before him, Harrison found himself doing something he hadn't done since childhood. Praying, not to any specific deity or with any formal words, but a desperate, silent plea to whatever forces might govern the universe. Save her. Let her live. His phone buzzed with texts from his assistant, crises at the office, pending decisions, urgent requests. For the first time in his adult life, Harrison ignored them all. Nothing in the corporate world seemed to matter compared to what was happening behind those operating room doors. A text from Claire appeared. "Oliver wants to know how his mom is doing." Harrison stared at the message, unsure how to respond. What could he tell a 10-year-old boy whose mother's life hung in the balance? He finally typed, "The doctors are taking very good care of her. I'll call as soon as there's news." Minutes later, a photo arrived. Oliver and Buddy in Harrison's penthouse kitchen, both looking slightly bewildered by the high-end appliances. Despite everything, Harrison smiled. He'd instructed his housekeeper to make the place as welcoming as possible, but he could imagine how strange his minimalist, design magazine-worthy home must seem to a child accustomed to a cozy apartment filled with books and artwork. Another hour passed. Harrison paced the waiting room, ignoring curious glances from hospital staff who clearly recognized him. His usual tailored suit had been replaced by the same clothes he'd worn yesterday, his normally perfect appearance rumpled from the night spent in a hospital chair. "Mr. Wells?" Harrison turned to find Dr. Montgomery standing in the doorway, still in his surgical scrubs. The doctor's face revealed nothing, his professional mask firmly in place. "How is she?" Harrison demanded, his voice hoarse. Dr. Montgomery gestured for Harrison to sit. The procedure was more complex than anticipated. Mrs. Mackenzie's heart damage was extensive, and we encountered several complications. Harrison felt his own heart constrict. "Is she?" "She's alive," the surgeon said quickly, "but the next 24 hours will be critical. We had to place her on temporary mechanical support to allow her heart to recover from the surgery." "What does that mean exactly?" Harrison asked, forcing himself to focus on practical details rather than the fear threatening to overwhelm him. "It means we're assisting her heart function while her body recovers from the trauma of surgery. If all goes well, we'll be able to wean her off support in the next day or two." Dr. Montgomery's expression softened slightly. Mrs. Mackenzie showed remarkable strength. Many patients in her condition wouldn't have survived the procedure at all. "Can I see her?" "She's in recovery now. Once she's stabilized, we'll move her to the ICU. You can see her briefly then, but she'll be heavily sedated." Harrison nodded, processing the information. Sarah was alive. That was what mattered. Everything else they could handle. "Thank you, doctor," he said, extending his hand. "For everything." After Dr. Montgomery left, Harrison stepped outside the hospital to call Claire and Oliver. The morning sun was unexpectedly bright, the everyday bustle of the world jarring after the suspended reality of the waiting room. "Harrison," Oliver's voice came through immediately. "How's Mum? Is she okay?" Harrison took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "The surgery is over and your mom did really well. She's very strong." "When can I talk to her?" "Not for a little while. She needs to rest after such a big operation. But as soon as she's able to talk, you'll be the first person to hear her voice." Harrison paused. "How are you doing? Is Buddy behaving himself?" "He peed on something in your bathroom," Oliver admitted worriedly. "A fuzzy white rug. Aunt Claire tried to clean it, but it still looks kind of yellow." Despite everything, Harrison laughed, a genuine, unexpected sound. "Don't worry about it. That rug cost more than my first car, but it's just a thing. Things can be replaced." After assuring Oliver he would call again soon, Harrison returned to the hospital and was directed to the cardiac ICU. A nurse escorted him to Sarah's room, warning him that the sight might be disturbing. Nothing could have prepared him for seeing Sarah, vibrant, determined Sarah, lying motionless among a tangle of tubes and wires. A ventilator breathed for her, making her chest rise and fall in an artificial rhythm. Monitors displayed her vital signs in glowing green lines. Despite the nurse's assurances that this was all normal post-cardiac surgery, Harrison felt a wave of despair wash over him. "Talk to her," the nurse encouraged before leaving. "Many patients can hear even when sedated." Alone with Sarah, Harrison carefully took her hand, mindful of the IV line. "You did it," he said softly. "You got through the surgery. Now you just need to rest and get stronger." His voice caught unexpectedly. "Oliver and Buddy are waiting for you. We're all waiting for you." The machines continued their steady beeping. The ventilator, its rhythmic whooshing. There was no response. No sign that Sarah heard him. Yet Harrison continued talking, telling her about Oliver's adventures in his penthouse, promising to bring her son to visit as soon as she was stronger, sharing meaningless anecdotes from his own life, anything to fill the silence, to create a lifeline of words between them. Hours passed. Nurses came and went, checking monitors, adjusting medications. Harrison refused to leave, using his considerable influence to override hospital visiting policies. As evening fell, he was still there, maintaining his vigil. Dr. Montgomery returned, reviewing Sarah's charts with a guarded expression. "Her condition is stable, but she's not making the progress I'd hoped to see by now." "What does that mean?" Harrison demanded. "It means we need to be patient. Her body has been through an extraordinary trauma. Recovery isn't linear." When the doctor left, Harrison found himself alone once more with Sarah and the machines keeping her alive. A profound exhaustion settled over him, not just physical fatigue from the sleepless night and stressful day, but a deeper weariness born of emotional investment in another's survival. For most of his adult life, Harrison had deliberately avoided such investments. Relationships required vulnerability. Vulnerability created weakness. Weakness led to failure. These had been his operating principles, the foundation upon which he'd built his empire. Now, watching Sarah fight for her life, those principles seemed hollow. What good was success if it left you with no one to care about? What purpose did wealth serve, if not to protect those who mattered to you? These questions circled in Harrison's mind as he drifted into an exhausted sleep, still holding Sarah's hand. He awoke to movement. Sarah's fingers were twitching in his grasp. Instantly alert, Harrison looked up to find her eyes open, confused, frightened by the tube in her throat, but unmistakably aware. "Sarah," he breathed, reaching for the call button. "It's okay. You're okay. The surgery is over." A nurse responded immediately, checking vital signs and assessing Sarah's responsiveness. "This is very good," she assured them both. "I'll page Dr. Montgomery." While they waited, Harrison maintained eye contact with Sarah, whose gaze had fixed on him with surprising intensity, despite her weakened state. He continued talking, reassuring her about Oliver, explaining where she was and what had happened. Though she couldn't speak with the ventilator in place, her eyes communicated both understanding and something else. Surprise, perhaps, at finding him still there. Dr. Montgomery arrived, clearly pleased by Sarah's awakening. After a thorough examination, he delivered the news they'd been hoping for. "We're seeing significant improvement in cardiac function. If this continues, we can consider removing the ventilator tomorrow." After the doctor left, Sarah managed to free her hand from Harrison's grip. With evident effort, she pointed to a notepad on the bedside table. Harrison quickly provided it, along with a pen. Her handwriting was shaky, but legible. "Oliver?" "He's fine," Harrison assured her quickly. "Staying at my place with Buddy and your sister. He's worried about you, but he's safe and well cared for." She nodded slightly, then wrote again, "You stayed." Harrison looked at the two simple words, feeling their weight. "Of course I stayed," he replied, his voice rougher than he intended. "I wouldn't leave you alone through this." Sarah's eyes held his for a long moment. Then she wrote, "Thank you." "No," Harrison said softly. "Thank you for fighting, for surviving." In the stillness of the ICU, surrounded by the mechanical sounds of healing, something profound and irrevocable shifted between them. Harrison Wells, who had spent decades ensuring he needed no one, acknowledged to himself what he had been avoiding for weeks. He needed Sarah Mackenzie to live, not for Oliver's sake, not for some abstract moral principle, but for his own. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was the most honest emotion he had felt in 20 years. When Sarah drifted back to sleep, her face more peaceful now, Harrison stepped into the hallway to call Oliver. As the boy's excited voice came through the line, peppering him with questions about his mother, Harrison made a silent promise to them both. Whatever happened next, whatever challenges Sarah's recovery might bring, he would be there. Not as a benefactor or a distant friend, but as someone who had found, against all expectations, a reason to care again. 2 weeks after her surgery, Sarah Mackenzie was deemed stable enough to return to Boston. Harrison had arranged for a medical transport flight equipped with everything necessary to ensure her comfort and safety during the journey. Dr. Montgomery had been hesitant at first, preferring to keep her under observation at the Cleveland clinic, but Sarah's determination to return home to Oliver had ultimately swayed him. "Remember, Mrs. Mackenzie," the doctor cautioned during his final visit, "your recovery is far from complete. You'll need several months of careful rehabilitation and monitoring before we can consider you fully recovered." Sarah nodded, her face thinner than before, but with healthy color returning to her cheeks. The ventilator had been removed 5 days after surgery, and she'd been making steady progress since. "I understand, Doctor. I'll follow every instruction to the letter." She will," Harrison assured from his position by the window, where he'd been fielding business calls. In the past 2 weeks, he'd developed a routine: mornings at Sarah's bedside, afternoons spent in a makeshift office in a nearby hotel, evenings split between video calls with Oliver and returning to the hospital. After Dr. Montgomery left, Sarah turned to Harrison. "You don't have to escort me back to Boston, you know. I'm sure your company needs you." "Wells Technologies has survived my absence remarkably well," Harrison replied dryly. "Richard may actually be enjoying his temporary elevation to acting CEO." He crossed the room to sit beside her bed. "Besides, I promised Oliver we'd return together." Sarah studied him with those perceptive blue eyes. "Harrison, we need to talk about what happens next." He tensed slightly. During her recovery, they'd developed a comfortable rapport, but had carefully avoided discussion of the future, of what their relationship might become once the immediate medical crisis passed. "What do you mean?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral. "I mean that Oliver and I need to go home, to our apartment. He needs his routine, his school, his normal life." She hesitated. "And I need to start rebuilding mine." Harrison nodded slowly. Of course she was right. His penthouse was no place for a child long-term, and Sarah needed her independence. Yet the thought of them returning to their separate existence, with him in his sterile tower and them in their modest apartment, created an unexpected ache in his chest. "Your doctors recommend a home health aide for at least the first month," he reminded her, "and your apartment has stairs, which you're not supposed to climb repeatedly yet." "I know. I've been thinking about that." Deep, Sarah squared her shoulders in a gesture Harrison had come to recognize as her preparing to assert her independence. "Claire can stay with us for a few weeks, and I've called my school district about medical leave. They've been very supportive." "And the financial aspects?" Harrison asked carefully, knowing how fiercely she guarded her dignity. "The foundation you created is covering the medical bills," she acknowledged, "for which I am deeply grateful. But day-to-day expenses, I have some savings." Harrison fought the urge to offer more assistance, understanding it would likely be rejected. "What about home health care? The foundation typically covers that as part of recovery." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but Harrison—" She reached for his hand, a gesture that had become natural between them over the past weeks. "I need you to understand something important. What you've done for us, for me, it goes beyond anything I could have imagined. You literally saved my life." "The doctors saved your lives," he corrected gently. "You know what I mean." Her grip tightened. "But I need to stand on my own again, and Oliver needs to see me do that." Harrison felt a complex mix of emotions: admiration for her strength, frustration at her stubborn independence, and beneath it all, a growing fear that once she no longer needed his help, there would be no place for him in their lives. "I understand," he said finally, though part of him didn't or didn't want to. Sarah seemed to read his thoughts. "This isn't goodbye, Harrison. Not if you don't want it to be." The simple statement sent a wave of relief through him so profound it was almost physical. "I don't want it to be," he admitted. She smiled, that warm, genuine expression that had first caught his attention in her apartment doorway weeks ago. Good. Because Oliver would never forgive me if his hero disappeared. I'm hardly a hero, Harrison protested. You are to him. She paused, her expression growing more serious. And what you've become to me, it's not something I expected. Before Harrison could respond, a nurse entered to prepare Sarah for her discharge, interrupting the moment. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of paperwork, instructions, and preparations for the journey home. By evening, they were airborne in the medical transport plane, Sarah comfortably settled in a specialized berth that kept her reclined at the recommended angle for her recovery. As they flew over darkening landscapes, Harrison found himself watching her sleep, marveling at how completely this woman and her son had upended his carefully ordered existence. His phone vibrated with a text from Claire. Oliver can't wait to see you both. He's made welcome home signs for the apartment. Harrison smiled, trying to picture his penthouse festooned with a child's handmade decorations. The image was so incongruous with his usual living environment that it struck him as both absurd and oddly appealing. When they landed in Boston, a medical transport was waiting to take Sarah directly to her apartment. Harrison followed in his car, having sent Edward ahead to help Claire prepare for their arrival. Oakwood Apartments looked exactly the same as when he'd first visited weeks earlier, yet everything else had changed. As Harrison helped the medical team transport Sarah to her apartment, he noticed details he'd missed before. The small community garden, where elderly residents tended flowers, the children's bicycles chained to a rack near the entrance, the general atmosphere of modest but dignified community. When they reached 2B, the door flew open before they could knock. Oliver stood there, vibrating with excitement, but clearly having been cautioned to remain calm for his mother's sake. True to Claire's text, the apartment was decorated with colorful hand-drawn signs proclaiming, "Welcome home, Mom," and "You did it, Mom." Oliver rushed forward as the medical team settled Sarah into a rented hospital bed that had been placed in the living room. She opened her arms to him, her face alight with joy, despite her evident exhaustion. Harrison stood back, watching their reunion with a complex mixture of emotions. Joy at seeing them together again, pride in having helped make this moment possible, and beneath it all, a nagging sense of being an outsider to their fundamental bond. "Harrison," Oliver broke away from his mother to throw his arms around Harrison's waist. "Thank you for bringing Mom home." The simple, unguarded gratitude pierced through Harrison's momentary melancholy. He awkwardly returned the boy's embrace, still unaccustomed to such physical demonstrations of affection. "Your mother did all the hard work," he said, ruffling Oliver's hair. "I just arranged the transportation." "Don't believe him, Oliver," Sarah called from her bed. "Harrison hasn't left my side for 2 weeks. He's been absolutely incredible." The medical team finished setting up equipment and providing instructions to Claire, who looked overwhelmed but determined. After they departed, leaving behind mountains of medication, a schedule of home health visits, and emergency contact information, Harrison found himself lingering, uncertain of his place in this new phase. "Well," he said finally, gathering his coat, "you should rest. I'll check in tomorrow to see how you're settling in." "You're leaving?" Oliver asked, disappointment evident in his voice. "But we got ice cream for everyone. And Buddy misses you." On cue, the puppy, noticeably larger after 2 weeks, bounded into the room from Oliver's bedroom, where he'd apparently been confined during the medical team's visit. Harrison hesitated, looking to Sarah for guidance. "Stay for ice cream," she invited softly. "Unless you have somewhere else to be?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with meanings beyond the simple inquiry about his schedule. Did he have somewhere else to be? For 20 years, Harrison Wells had filled his life with meetings, acquisitions, business dinners, all while maintaining a careful emotional distance from genuine connection. "No," he said finally, "there's nowhere else I need to be. Over ice cream, served in mismatched bowls from Sarah's modest kitchen, they talked about ordinary things. Oliver's school projects, a funny incident with Buddy and Harrison's Italian leather shoes, Claire's new job prospect. It was simple, domestic, and utterly foreign to Harrison's usual evening routine of solitary work and expensive scotch. Yet as he sat in that small apartment, watching Oliver demonstrate Buddy's newest trick while Sarah laughed from her bed, Harrison realized something profound. He felt at home, not in the physical sense. The apartment was a far cry from his luxurious penthouse, but in a deeper, more essential way he hadn't experienced since childhood. As the evening wound down, Claire tactfully suggested Oliver get ready for bed. The boy protested briefly, then extracted a promise from Harrison to visit again tomorrow, before reluctantly heading to his room with Buddy trailing behind. Left alone with Sarah, Harrison moved to sit beside her bed. "How are you feeling, honestly?" "Tired, sore, but alive." She reached for his hand, a gesture that had become natural during her hospital stay, "and grateful beyond words." "You don't need to keep thanking me," Harrison said quietly. "I wasn't just talking about the medical help." Sarah's blue eyes held his. "These past weeks, getting to know you beyond the billionaire facade, it's been unexpected, in a good way." Harrison felt an unfamiliar vulnerability, a cracking in the armor he'd maintained for decades. "I should be thanking you and Oliver. You've shown me..." He struggled to articulate the profound shift in his perspective. "You've shown me what I've been missing." Sarah's expression softened. "What happens now, Harrison? Between us?" The directness of her question was so characteristic of her that Harrison found himself smiling, despite the weight of the moment. "I don't know," he admitted. "I'm not very good at this." He gestured vaguely between them. "Personal relationships?" she supplied with gentle understanding. "Yes, I've spent most of my adult life avoiding them." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Well, I'm not exactly an expert myself. It's been just Oliver and me for so long." She paused. "But I think maybe we could figure it out together." Slowly. The simple proposal, to explore whatever was developing between them without pressure or expectations, loosened something that had been tight in Harrison's chest since they'd left Cleveland. "I'd like that," he said softly. "Good." She yawned, her medication clearly taking effect. "Because Oliver's already planning to have you teach him how to throw a baseball this weekend." Harrison laughed. "I should warn you, my athletic skills are questionable at best. My boarding school focused more on academic achievement than sports." "That's all right. It's not really about the baseball." Her eyes were drifting closed, but she rallied to add, "Oliver needs good men in his life, Harrison. Men who keep their promises." The simple statement carried a weight of responsibility that would have terrified the Harrison Wells of 2 months ago. Now, he found himself embracing it. "I'll be there," he promised, "for both of you." As Sarah drifted into sleep, Harrison gently released her hand and rose to leave. Claire showed him to the door, her initial wariness toward him now replaced with a guarded respect. "She's going to push herself too hard," Claire warned in a hushed voice. "She always does. Wants to prove she can handle everything alone." "I've noticed," Harrison replied dryly. "She might let you help, though." Claire gave him a searching look. "She trusts you. Don't make her regret that." "I won't," Harrison promised, recognizing the protective concern behind Claire's directness. As he stepped out into the cool evening air, Harrison paused to look back at the modest apartment building that housed the two people who had somehow broken through 20 years of emotional isolation. The contrast between their world and his couldn't have been more stark, yet he felt more connected to humanity in their small living room than he ever had in his penthouse, with its panoramic city views. His phone buzzed with messages from Richard, urgent business matters requiring his attention after 2 weeks of relative absence. Yesterday, these would have immediately pulled him back into his role as CEO. Tonight, Harrison simply silenced the phone and slipped it into his pocket. Tomorrow would be soon enough to return to Wells Technologies. Tomorrow, he would begin the process of redefining his life to make room for something beyond business success. For now, he wanted to hold on to this feeling of being needed not for his wealth or power, but simply for himself. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Harrison Wells stood at the edge of Boston Common, watching Oliver throw a tennis ball for Buddy. The golden retriever, now fully grown, bounded after it with joyful enthusiasm, his coat gleaming in the sunlight. Nearby, Sarah sat on a park bench, a stack of student papers beside her, her face animated as she graded her students' work. Her return to teaching 3 months ago had been a milestone in her recovery, one that her doctors had initially questioned, but ultimately approved when they witnessed her determination. Harrison had watched with admiration as she gradually rebuilt her strength, following every medical recommendation with disciplined precision, while steadfastly reclaiming her independence. "Did you see that catch, Harrison?" Oliver called out, beaming with pride as Buddy returned with the ball. "He didn't drop it once." "Impressive," Harrison acknowledged, smiling at the boy's enthusiasm. "Your training is paying off." In the months since Sarah's surgery, Harrison had become a fixture in their lives. It had begun with practical assistance, driving Sarah to medical appointments, helping Oliver with homework when Claire returned to her own home, ensuring the home health aides had everything they needed. Gradually, those necessary visits had evolved into family dinners, weekend outings, and quiet evenings spent in comfortable conversation after Oliver went to bed. The transformation in Harrison's life had been equally profound. He still led Wells Technologies, but with a fundamentally different approach. He'd restructured his schedule to create space for what he now recognized truly mattered. The Second Chance Foundation had expanded beyond its initial focus on educators' medical needs to address healthcare accessibility more broadly, becoming Harrison's passion project. "You're thinking too hard again," Sarah observed as he joined her on the bench. "I can practically hear the gears turning." Harrison chuckled, just reflecting. "It's been quite a journey these past months." Sarah's hand found his, a gesture that had become natural between them. "Indeed it has." They watched in comfortable silence as Oliver continued playing with Buddy, the boy's laughter carrying across the park. Several other families were enjoying the beautiful day. Parents pushing strollers, couples walking hand in hand, children chasing each other through piles of fallen leaves. "My last cardiac checkup is next week," Sarah mentioned casually. "Dr. Chen thinks they might reduce my follow-ups to quarterly after this." Harrison nodded, trying to mask his concern. Sarah's recovery had progressed remarkably well, but he still found himself anxious before each medical appointment, the memory of those terrifying days in Cleveland never entirely fading. "That's excellent news," he said, squeezing her hand. "Would you like me to come with you?" "If you can manage it, though I know you have that board meeting on the same day." Harrison smiled. "The board can wait. Some things are more important." Sarah studied his face, her blue eyes thoughtful. You really have changed, you know. For the better, I hope." "Definitely for the better," she assured him, "though I occasionally miss that intimidating billionaire who refused to let me sell my independence for his charity." Harrison laughed. "He still makes an appearance in the boardroom occasionally. Richard says I've gone soft, but the quarterly results suggest otherwise." Their conversation was interrupted by Oliver rushing over, slightly out of breath. "Mom, can Harrison come for dinner tonight? I want to show him my science project. It got an A." Sarah glanced at Harrison with a raised eyebrow. "I'm sure Harrison has other commitments." Nothing that can't be rescheduled, Harrison interjected smoothly. I'd love to see your project, Oliver. The boy's face lit up. It's about renewable energy. I built a working solar panel that powers a small motor. Harrison, maybe your company could use my design. We might have to refine it slightly, Harrison replied seriously, but I'm always looking for innovative engineers. As Oliver ran back to Buddy, satisfied with Harrison's response, Sarah shook her head in amused exasperation. You're going to give him ideas. Next, he'll be asking for a corner office at Wells Technologies. He'd probably revolutionize our R&D department, Harrison mused. That boy has an extraordinary mind. Like someone else I know, Sarah said softly. She began gathering her papers, indicating she was ready to leave. Oh, before I forget, Claire asked if we're still planning to join her family for Thanksgiving next month. The casual inclusion in their holiday plans still caught Harrison by surprise sometimes. After decades of perfunctory celebrations, usually business dinners with associates rather than genuine festivities, being welcomed into a family's traditions felt like a gift he hadn't known to seek. I'd like that, he said simply. As they walked through the park toward the parking area where Harrison's car waited, Oliver racing ahead with Buddy, Sarah slowed her pace. I've been thinking about something, she began, her tone suggesting significance. Harrison matched her slower steps. What is it? My lease at Oakwood is coming up for renewal in January. He nodded, waiting for her to continue. The apartment has served us well, but... She hesitated. It's becoming a bit small for Oliver, Buddy, and all of Oliver's projects. And the stairs still aren't ideal for days when my energy's low. Have you started looking at other options? Harrison asked carefully, his heart rate quickening slightly. Sarah stopped walking altogether, turning to face him directly. Actually, I was wondering if you might have some thoughts on the matter. Harrison studied her expression, reading the invitation in her eyes. They had taken things slowly, as promised, building a relationship based on genuine understanding and shared experiences, rather than the heightened emotions of the medical crisis that had brought them together. I might have some ideas, he replied, matching her deliberate tone. For instance, there's a brownstone in Back Bay that recently came on the market. 4 bedrooms, a small garden for Buddy, excellent school district for Oliver. He paused. And it happens to be only 10 minutes from my office. That sounds lovely, Sarah said, but I could never afford. Harrison gently placed a finger against her lips. It would be ours, together, if that's something you might consider. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. Harrison Wells, are you asking me to move in with you? I'm asking for more than that, Sarah. He took both her hands in his. I'm asking if you and Oliver might consider building a life with me, not in my penthouse, which was never really a home, but in a new place that could belong to all of us. Tears gathered in Sarah's eyes. You know Oliver comes as part of the package deal, permanently. I would hope so, Harrison replied sincerely. He's an extraordinary young man. You both are extraordinary. Sarah's smile bloomed slowly. We've only known each other 6 months. True, but they've been the most meaningful 6 months of my life. Harrison's voice grew more serious. I spent 20 years building an empire and forgot to build a life. You and Oliver reminded me of what truly matters. I love you both, and if you need more time... Sarah stood on tiptoe and silenced him with a gentle kiss. Yes, she whispered against his lips. We'll build a life together. From down the path, Oliver's voice called out, Mom, Harrison, are you guys coming or what? Buddy's getting hungry. They broke apart, laughing. We'll be right there, Sarah called back. To Harrison, she added softly, I should warn you, when he finds out about this, he's going to have about 1,000 questions. I look forward to answering every one of them. Harrison replied, his heart lighter than he could ever remember it being. As they walked hand in hand toward Oliver and Buddy, Harrison reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. 6 months ago, he had been a solitary figure in a glass tower, wealthy beyond measure, yet impoverished in all the ways that truly mattered. A chance encounter with a boy selling his beloved puppy had cracked open a door he'd thought permanently sealed. Now, as Harrison looked at Sarah beside him and Oliver ahead, he understood what his success had been missing all along: purpose beyond profit, connection beyond contracts, love beyond ambition. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah asked, noting his thoughtful expression. "Second chances," Harrison replied simply, "and how grateful I am for mine." As Oliver ran back to them, Buddy at his heels, Harrison Wells, billionaire, philanthropist, and now, most importantly, family man, opened his arms to embrace the future he'd never dared to imagine, but now couldn't imagine living without. "My name is Theo Teller, and I want to thank you for joining me on this journey of transformation and second chances. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to leave a like. It helps others discover these narratives of hope and renewal. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What moment in Harrison and Sarah's journey resonated most with you? Do you have suggestions for future stories you'd like to hear? And if you enjoyed this tale of unexpected connections and life-changing encounters, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support allows us to continue sharing these powerful stories that remind us of our shared humanity and the possibility of transformation that exists in each of our lives. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most valuable things in life can't be bought. They can only be given freely from the heart.